So one argument that I've had with Gotham Knights and our DC fans video game community is that Gotham Knights combat is actually a solid combat system. Now, for many people, they come up with different arguments like, the combat may be solid, but it seems like it's lacking a few things. Whenever we start to dig down into whatever few things it's lacking, we usually see that it's a preference for people who are wanting the game to carry the combat identity of the Arkham games, which had a counter system for the most part. And then maybe sometimes people will talk about gadgets, but that's kind of out of the question because the way Gotham Knights is structured, it's an RPG. Your gear and some of your different elements kind of act as your gadgets, and you could pretty much vary them, giving them a wider variety. So I think that argument kind of got, shelved for the most part because, you can't really hold it up in the same light. But the conversation about a counter system to me is one that I think whenever we in the community talk about it, we need to also realize that you cannot necessarily judge one video game by the standard of another one, especially when we've seen successful video games that do not have a counter system. There are two of my audience members who constantly say that. They say, these other games have a counter system. This other game has a counter system. And, it was fun and a lot of people enjoyed it. But most of the time, what they fail to always acknowledge is that there is another game that is actually much more successful than all these other games that did not have a counter system, that is very widely available. And a lot of fans never really seem to give one single hint that this was something that they were concerned about. In fact, when this game was made, its iteration probably removed a lot of other things from previous titles, and that is Marvel's Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales. If you've played any of the older Spider-Man games, you could block in some of them. If you've played a game like, say, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, or if you've played a game that, was probably iterative of the old Spider-Man games from back in the day, you would see that these were actual things. You could dodge, you could do a lot of really cool things in combat, but they gave you the option to be able to block. In the new Spider-Man iterations, you're not able to block, so the only way for you to pretty much evade enemy attacks is to either dodge or to counter using one of your special moves in your ability tree, or maybe do a takedown finisher if you've already charged up your combo meter to the required aspect that you can actually use it to do a finisher. Or maybe you can even heal yourself, which is weird. The game's got a heal system as well. And this is one thing that we haven't really paid very close attention to is in the conversations, we talked about how Gotham Knights was very similar to Spider-Man, but a lot of people said, well, because Gotham Knights doesn't seem to have the photorealistic look of Spider-Man, there's no way we can make that comparison. I argue because I use game engines that the photorealistic look is an artistic direction. You can make your game look however you want it to look. You can make it look pixelated if you want. You can make it have a filter that makes it look like a cartoon. You could design your game how you want. So we can make that argument on the artistic side in a different video. Let's say both games, we were evaluating them from the combat side. We would see that there are all kinds of really fun elements that represent these 5 superheroes or characters, or let me say 6 of them, depending on how you want to chalk it, in their own special ability class, which makes them very unique in how they play. I decided to highlight all 6 of these because I think they're very important to you. So in the Gotham Knights class, we have 4 characters, and in the Spider-Man class, we now have 2. We have Miles and we have Peter. We also have Red Hood, we have Robin, we have Batgirl, and we have Nightwing. All of these characters play and accentuate their own play styles based on the video game design that has actually been implemented for them. And they actually, in my opinion, emphasize what these characters are and are not necessarily bogged down by an other system, basically the Arkham system that requires for you to attack, counter, but instead wants you to be able to control the pace of combat. In the place of Spider-Man, what happened was they took a lot of notes from the Arkham games and implemented it in their game. There's no doubt about that. Brian Intihar, who is the creative director for Marvel Spider-Man 2018, mentioned that the Arkham games were a huge influence and inspiration for their game. There's a news article that actually, or multiple articles that actually cite him saying this. There's no problem with this. But they never went with the full-blown version of what Arkham did in its combat. They provided character archetypes that you had, but what you see is with their character archetypes, you have a lot of them quite representative in a game like Gotham Knights. Gotham Knights actually took from the Spider-Man games and was able to implement that because if you look at the scenario here that I'm playing here in the video, you see that there's a lot of projectile characters. You can barely land a good number of combos even in this scene once you actually trigger or aggro all the bad guys because they just continue to go after you. There are ones that lob grenades, a bunch of them that are shooting, they're jumping all over the place after you and so on and so forth. It's very chaotic in this Miles Morales fight sequence here. And for those who were saying, well, Gotham Knights doesn't seem to have that free aspect of it, I'm wondering if they didn't see that the Spider-Man community actually enjoyed their games without that level of the 100% free flow that you can achieve almost every time in a Batman game. Because sometimes in a Spider-Man game, you can achieve that freedom, no doubt about that. But once they up the ante in Miles Morales or some of the different enemy classes, or even later game with Peter Parker, you start to realize that a lot of your free flowingness requires a higher skill level, which you also see in Gotham Knights, because you can actually flow in the combat with Gotham Knights. A lot of people feel like they can't necessarily do it, but the truth of the matter is Gotham Knights reduces your ability to go on a perfect run, in the sense that the enemy archetypes and the way they lock you into animations do not let you become invincible 100% of the time. So you have to learn what makes you invincible, what enemy archetypes are going to ignore a lot of your special finishers and so on and so forth, and then go on from there. Because if you are basically invincible 100 of the time, then where's the difficulty and where's the challenge? I've also seen some people say things like, well, Elden Ring had a parry system too, because, sometimes you say Gotham Knight's an RPG, yada, yada, yada. But many of these folk, I don't think you can even parry in Elden Ring. Let me give you a copy of Elden Ring. Let me give you the bandit shield, and then go out there and go parry an enemy NPC. See how hard it is. Because what Elden Ring and From Software's developers did was they increased the difficulty curve for parrying enemy attacks. So pretty much you have to actually learn how to parry by dying, because not every enemy attack is parryable. That's the first thing you have to know. In a game like God of War Ragnarok, most of the enemy attacks are parryable. You would see an indicator telling you, oh yeah, you can't parry this one, you gotta dodge. But in Elden Ring, you don't get an indicator telling you that you can do that. You just basically have to know it from learning. So that's one way. Also, what they did with Elden Ring is they allowed for you to be able to actually use your parry system with different kinds of shield. A smaller shield, like the bandit shield, that's why I mentioned it, is one that actually allows you a bigger timing window because it's a small, lighter shield. So you can actually make more mistakes in doing the wrong timing and still be able to get the parry in a very small window nonetheless. If you get a bigger shield, you have to be much more precise, and those shields are stronger and can parry different attacks from what the bandit shield can always parry. And so this is a knowledge base that you must learn by actually playing and engaging in the game. It's a very difficult game to play at a very high skill level. But these superhero games don't even maintain that kind of difficulty, and it's surprising that people would actually cite Elden Ring's parrying capabilities, when in reality, that's not something that you really want every gamer to have to deal with or deal in. So again, we come down to this place where Gotham Knights is being held to a standard that is not being held, or is not subjectively, or I would say objectively, being met on other games that are out there. So to me, what is the issue? I mean, I'm wondering what these problems may be. Oh, it's preference. You prefer a combat system that gives you the ability to counter, to parry, or to block. That's fine. There are many video games that provide that. But to say that a game is, like one of my audience members said, regressed in its own design because it doesn't have a counter system, to me doesn't seem to make any sense. Now, again, if you say it's regressed because of your preference, that's fine, but it doesn't mean it's regressed because we see that the Spider-Man game has been able to net about 33 million copies plus sold, no counter system, billions of dollars earned, no counter system. So again, I think this is where we in the DC community have to really go ahead and say, man, we're probably too picky. Maybe we need to kind of calm down a little bit and, take a little less and meet in the middle, because if every one of you in the DC community wants a perfect game, you're not going to get it. In fact, what you're going to see is you're going to get more less perfect games because there is not necessarily enough room to make a lot of DC games. Think about it. There are only like 8 major studios that make DC games compared to, say, all the other games like the Marvel games, which you have a wider plethora of different developers that are able to come in and actually account for that. So this is going to be really interesting to see, folks. I'll talk about this in the next video. Thanks for listening to this one. I appreciate your time and audience. Hopefully we'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.